Inside a village hut, the Osage elders were conducting a mournful ceremony, after which the three elders buried a wrapped piece of ceremonial pipe in the ground. Later on, the Osage people celebrated after discovering oil on their lands, which soon generated wealth for the Osage Nation, making them the luckiest and richest per capita in the world. As the Osage Nation became the wealthiest per capita in the world, the U.S. Congress deemed them incompetent and enacted a law mandating the assignment of guardians to manage their wealth. Returning from World War I, Ernest Burkhart arrived in Oklahoma and was picked up by Henry Roan. Henry then brought Ernest to his uncle, William King Hale, also known as the King of the Osage Hills. William was revered for his kind nature and deep affection for the Osage people, viewing himself as a friend and supporter of the Osage community. Ernest engaged in a conversation with King about his military experiences. Their discussion was interrupted when Ernest's brother, Byron, entered the room. King advised Ernest not to create any issues since, apart from being a prominent businessman, he also held the position of deputy sheriff and aimed to avoid unnecessary problems. Additionally, he provided Ernest with a book on Osage culture and history, urging him to read it. Despite their success, members of the Osage Nation in the United States were mysteriously murdered, with no investigation conducted, and the deaths were often simply ruled as suicides. Molly Kyle, a wealthy full-blood Osage, discussed the considerable sum of money her family had recently spent. When she requested to use some for her diabetes medication, her plea was rejected by the man, who insisted that her family guardian's presence was required before she could access her own funds. Ernest met Molly while working as a cab driver and she became his regular customer. King saw this as an opportunity to advise Ernest to pursue a romantic relationship with Molly. Ernest followed the advice and gradually grew closer to her. Additionally, Ernest, along with Byron, had been involved in armed robberies targeting the Osage community, using the stolen funds for gambling purposes. Ernest and Molly got to know each other, and a romance quickly blossomed between them. Their relationship grew increasingly serious, culminating in Ernest and Molly marrying in the traditional Osage manner. Amidst the celebration, King comforted a grieving female Osage member who was reportedly ill and later passed away. While the Osage community mourned the loss of their friend, King persuaded Ernest to exploit the situation, suggesting that if more of Molly's family members died, more money would eventually flow to Molly, and in the event of Molly's passing, that wealth would transfer to Ernest. After the woman's death, life returned to normal for a while. By that time, Ernest and Molly already had children when an unexpected event occurred. Lizzie, Molly's mother, noticed an owl by the window and warned Molly that seeing the owl was a sign that their family was facing death because of Molly, suggesting that marrying a white man would lead to the downfall of the Osage. Lizzie then expressed her love for Anna, Molly's sister, but made it clear she did not feel the same way toward Molly. After hearing this, Molly wordlessly walked away. Anna, in a drunken state, arrived and attempted to sit on Byron's lap, but he pushed her away, leading to Anna becoming angry and slapping Byron. Molly intervened to pacify Anna, but when Anna witnessed Byron shamelessly flirting with a maid, her anger intensified. Ernest and Molly stepped in to stop the fight. As Anna reached for a gun, Ernest swiftly disarmed her, pushing Byron out of the house, while Molly held on to Anna, trying to calm her down. The following day, Anna and Byron reconciled and departed together. This marked the final encounter Molly had with Anna before receiving the news of Anna's untimely death. Molly went to visit Anna, and Ernest hugged her as she cried upon seeing her deceased sister. On the same day, the body of another Osage man was discovered, and both deaths were ruled as murders. Following their deaths, a meeting was arranged where Molly proposed a reward for information leading to the apprehension of her sister's killer. King supplemented the reward with an additional $1,000 and encouraged anyone with tips to report to him. The tribal council instructed Mr. McBride to travel to Washington, D.C., and meet with the Indian Affairs Commission to seek assistance in the investigation. Tragically, he was fatally stabbed. Ernest and Molly met with William Burns, the skilled private detective hired by Molly to investigate her sister's murder. During the investigation, the detective discovered that Bill Smith had been conducting his own inquiries. Additionally, it was revealed that Anna was pregnant at the time of her death, although no further information had been uncovered. Unknown to Molly, Ernest had been secretly monitoring her and sharing all the detective's findings with King. In another incident, a group of men vandalized Anna's grave, stealing all the jewelry from her body. Ernest was aware that the perpetrators were led by a man named Blackie. He confronted Blackie to coerce him into a plan, kill his wife's sister, Rita, in exchange for an insurance payout by staging a car theft. However, before the plan could be carried out, Blackie was arrested. King, furious, summoned Ernest and reprimanded him for allowing the situation to escalate to the point where Molly hired an investigator. King scolded Ernest for failing to maintain control over his family. William Burns was on the verge of entering his room when two men forcibly pushed him inside and viciously assaulted him. The detective mysteriously vanished, and Molly never received any further information about his whereabouts. Ernest and King approached Henry Grammer to seek assistance in completing the supposed task left by Blackie. Henry suggested hiring an explosive expert named A.C. Kirby. At the Burkhart's residence, doctors attending to Molly's diabetes paid a visit to administer her insulin shot. However, Molly refused the treatment, leaving Ernest with no option but to ask the doctors to leave while he took the insulin kit. After the doctors departed, Ernest attempted to talk to Molly, but she became emotional, which frustrated Ernest, resulting in an argument. Eventually, Molly allowed Ernest to administer the injection. Ernest then reassured and comforted her, promising that no one would harm her. Meanwhile, Henry Roan, also an Osage member, fell ill, prompting King to offer assistance, which puzzled Ernest. King explained that he was the beneficiary of Roan's life insurance policy and needed Henry to survive for a few more months. King then revealed that Henry was Molly's first husband, which shocked Ernest. Lizzie, on the other hand, was gradually declining in health each day, and eventually, she passed away. At a dinner, Molly confided in King about a private investigator she had hired. Unbeknownst to her, Ernest and Byron had killed the investigator. King, however, suggested that the investigator might have disappeared after receiving the payment. Following this revelation, Ernest and Molly announced Molly's pregnancy, although King didn't seem particularly pleased about the news. Ernest coerced John into a plan to make Henry's death look like a suicide. After their introduction, they frequently socialized by drinking and spending time together. Eventually, the two met in an isolated location, where John fatally shot Henry. Later, John met with Ernest to confirm the completion of the task, handing over the gun he used to kill Henry before departing. Ernest and King engaged in an argument concerning Henry's death, as it was not perceived as suicide but murder. Despite King's orders for Ernest to find AC and carry out the plan, Ernest approached John to locate AC instead. One night, while the Burkhart family was asleep, a sudden explosion occurred. Molly promptly checked on the children while Ernest went outside to assess the situation. He discovered that the exploded house belonged to the Smiths, where Molly's sister, Rita, along with her husband and a housekeeper, tragically perished. Ernest stood in shock as the others attended to Rita's body. Overwhelmed, he returned inside his home where his family awaited him. Molly, upon realizing her sister's death, let out a heart-wrenching scream of agony. Following Rita's death, Molly took it upon herself to visit Washington, D.C., seeking assistance in investigating the Osage murders. Unknown to Molly, her deteriorating health wasn't solely due to diabetes but the result of poison administered by Ernest and King, with the complicity of the doctors whom Molly had trusted to aid in her recovery. Finding Molly lying weak on her bed, Ernest offered her comfort as he administered another insulin injection. Shortly after, a knock at the door revealed a visitor, Tom White from the U.S. Bureau of Investigation. Ernest discovered that the Tribal Council had sought aid from the U.S. government, prompting the dispatch of agents from the U.S. Bureau of Investigation to look into the Osage murders. The agent requested to speak with Molly, but hesitant to let him in, Ernest informed the agent that Molly was resting after receiving her diabetes medication and suggested that he return on Friday. Panicked, Ernest urgently sought out King to inform his uncle about the arrival of the agents from the Bureau of Investigation. However, King was in the midst of a festival. Seeing Ernest's agitation, King advised him to calm down and take a seat before excusing himself, unaware that they were being observed. The following day, King went to the insurance agency to claim the insurance money left by Henry Roan, but his claim was denied. Despite attempting to intimidate the insurance agency employee using his influence, King's efforts were in vain, leaving him no choice but to depart in anger. The agents questioned the Shawn brothers about the process of exhuming Anna's body, which the brothers asserted was part of Indian culture. Meanwhile, Tom White approached King to ask him questions, but King refused, citing the inappropriateness of their current location. The agent agreed to meet with King at a later time. Blackie, a man hired by King, attempted to rob a bank and was subsequently apprehended by the authorities. Despite this, King continued providing support to Osage projects in an attempt to maintain a facade of friendship with the Osage community. Fearing potential exposure, King made the decision to eliminate some of his hired men, targeting A.C. Kirby, responsible for the Smith's home explosion, and his associate, Henry Grammer. A.C. and Henry attempted to rob a store, resulting in A.C.'s death, while Henry managed to flee but later crashed his car. Simultaneously, the Bureau of Investigation agents delved into their investigation, particularly focusing on Henry Roan's murder. Gradually, they began to notice the recurrent presence of King, Ernest, and Byron, finding their names consistently appearing in their observations. Further investigations revealed that Byron and Kelsey Morrison were present with Anna on the night she died. After continued inquiry, the agents managed to apprehend Morrison, who agreed to cooperate with the authorities. A fire erupted on King's ranch, coinciding with an incident where an agent, disguised as an insurance salesman, sold a fire policy. This added to suspicions regarding King's potential involvement in various fraudulent insurance policies. As the days passed, Ernest became increasingly paranoid, feeling the weight of his past misdeeds closing in on him. While he was tampering with his wife's insulin by adding poison, he deliberately contaminated his alcohol and consumed it. He then administered the insulin to his wife, before passing out. Ernest was taken and subjected to interrogation by the agents, but he remained silent. Upon the entrance of a handcuffed Blackie into the room, Ernest requested a private conversation, which the agents permitted. During their discussion, Blackie advised Ernest to confess for the sake of his family. Tom White attempted to persuade Ernest to open up, explaining that he was being manipulated due to his vulnerability. Eager to return home and see his wife, Ernest finally relented. Tom White then inquired if Ernest knew who was responsible for Henry Roan's murder. Upon John's arrest, he becomes aware that Ernest was the one who informed the authorities, leading him to decide to confess. Two agents visited Molly and were shocked to witness her deteriorating condition. Recognizing Molly was on the brink of death, the agents swiftly rushed her to the hospital for urgent medical treatment. Meanwhile, King voluntarily surrendered but maintained his innocence. Following this, Ernest was escorted into a car, accompanied by Tom White. Tom White indicated that they wouldn't press charges against Ernest if he agreed to testify. While Molly was on the road to recovery, King's downfall was imminent. Blackie confessed everything he knew, revealing crucial information to the agents, providing enough evidence for King's arrest. As Ernest took the witness stand in court, his supposed lawyer, Hamilton, immediately demanded that Ernest not testify before he could speak. Ernest clarified that he didn't know if Hamilton was his lawyer, as they had never spoken before. This created an uproar among the Osage Council. Following the initial trial, Ernest was taken to meet Molly, who was showing signs of improvement. At the subsequent trial, Molly was in attendance and heard Morrison explain how she and Byron killed Anna Brown following King's orders, displaying no remorse of his action. Following the second trial, one of Molly and Ernest's children tragically succumbed to whooping cough. Tom White visited Ernest, who was still in prison, to deliver the devastating news. Ernest, upon learning about the death of his child, screamed in agony. After attending his child's funeral, Ernest decided to testify and confess everything. During the third trial, Ernest confessed that King was indeed the mastermind behind the Osage murders. He confirmed their plan to eliminate every member of Molly's family to acquire their fortune. Despite this plan, Ernest admitted that he chose to marry Molly because he genuinely loved her. Molly confronts Ernest about the poisoning, but he refuses to admit to it, causing Molly to leave him. The Shawn brothers, implicated in providing poison to Ernest to mix with Molly's insulin and linked to other suspected deaths, avoided prosecution due to insufficient evidence. In contrast, Byron didn't serve any prison time because of a hung jury. William Hale received a life sentence but continued to maintain his innocence. In 1947, he was released on parole due to good behavior, reportedly attributed to paying politicians for his release. Though prohibited from setting foot in Oklahoma, he visited relatives. He passed away at the age of 87 in an Arizona nursing home. Likewise, Ernest was sentenced to life imprisonment but was granted a pardon years later. He returned to Osage County, residing in a trailer park with his brother Byron. After divorcing Ernest, Molly remarried. Tragically, she succumbed to diabetes at the age of 50 in 1937. She was laid to rest beside her family, including her parents, sisters, and daughter.